Please look after this one. That was what the tag said, stitched into the collar of a coat 3 sizes too large, written in a language the girl did not speak, fastened with thread that smelled like engine grease and someone else's kitchen. Sira Vakith ran. She ran through the lower market corridor of Preston Station, with the coat flapping behind her like a broken wing, her bare feet slapping against grating still warm from the ventilation cycle, and the 2 men behind her gaining ground because they had boots and longer legs and did not care who they knocked aside. She could hear their breathing, harsh, controlled, the efficient rhythm of people who chase things for a living. She could hear the jingling of the restraint cuffs on the shorter one's belt. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, and it sounded like a countdown. She cut left at a food stall, ducked under a table that smelled of fried kelp, and scrambled through a gap between 2 cargo containers that she fit through and they did not. Behind her, someone swore. Metal banged. A voice shouted a transit designation, hers, and the sound of it made her stomach clench because the designation was not her name, and every time someone used it instead of her name she became less of a person and more of a parcel. The gap opened onto a service corridor. Dim, narrow, pipes overhead dripping condensation that tasted like recycled air and old metal. Sira pressed herself against the wall and held her breath and listened. Footsteps retreating, a comm unit crackling. Lost visual on T-8830, lower market grid 7, sweep pattern delta. She waited until the footsteps dissolved into the station's ambient noise. The hum of ventilation, the distant rumble of docking clamps engaging, the 1,000 small mechanical sounds that a space station made when it was doing the only thing it knew how to do, which was keep people alive whether they wanted to be kept alive or not. Then she slid down the wall, pulled the too large coat around her shoulders, and sat in the dark with her knees drawn up and her forehead pressed against them and shook. She was 15. She had been running for 6 days. The coat still smelled like Kashari's kitchen, grain oil and dried herbs, and the particular metallic undertone of the water on freight stations. And every time Sira breathed it in, the smell hit her like a fist in the sternum because the kitchen was gone, and the woman who had stood in it was gone, and all that remained was a coat that did not fit, and 5 words Sira could not read. 40 years later, Ambassador Sira Vakith Solis of the Tessaran Cultural Reclamation stood at a podium in the Grand Assembly Hall of Meridian Station and looked out at 1,200 delegates and did not shake at all. The hall was vast, tiered seating rising in concentric arcs, delegations arranged by species and alliance block, translation fields shimmering faintly above each section like heat haze over stone. The Tessaran delegation sat in the 4th row, 7 members in formal gray, their pointed ears angled forward. The human contingent filled the upper tiers, civilian observers, diplomatic staff, a handful of colonial administrators who had traveled from postings across 30 systems to be present for this vote. "You have asked me to speak about the human protection doctrine," Sira said. Her voice carried the trained resonance of decades of diplomatic work, but underneath it, in the frequencies only a Tessaran could hear, there was a vibration that had nothing to do with amplification. "You have asked me to explain why the Tessaran Confederation signed the accord, and why we defend it, and why we will continue to defend it long after every delegate in this chamber has been replaced by someone who thinks the doctrine is sentimental." She paused, let the word land. Sentimental. She could feel the chamber assess it, the slight shift in breathing, the fractional adjustments of posture, the way the word divided the room into those who used it as a dismissal and those who recognized it as a weapon. "I will not explain it," she said. "I will tell you what happened. The explanation is in the happening." She looked down at her notes. She did not need them. Tessaran memory was eidetic for sensory input. She could recall the taste of recycled air in a service corridor 40 years gone as clearly as the water she had drunk that morning. But the notes were a prop, a concession to the audience's expectation that speeches required preparation rather than simply the willingness to remember. She set the notes aside. I was 15 years old, and I was running through a space station with someone else's coat on my back and a tag stitched into the collar that I could not read. The coat had belonged to her mother. Not her birth mother. Sira had no memory of her birth mother, who had died in the Tessaran dispersal when the colony worlds burned, and the children were scattered like seeds from a dead flower. Her mother in the way that mattered, Kashari Vakith, cultural archivist, who had found Sira in a transit camp when she was 3, and had raised her for 12 years in a single room on a freight station, and had taught her to read and to sing the old songs, and to carry herself with the quiet, stubborn dignity of a people who had lost everything, except the way they held their spines. Kashari had died 8 days before Sira ran through Preston Station. Died the way people died on freight stations, quietly, from an illness that would have been treatable anywhere with proper medical facilities, which freight stations did not have because freight stations existed to move cargo, not to keep people alive. Kashari had known she was dying for weeks. She had not told Sira. She had spent those weeks stitching the coat, cutting down her own long archivist's robe, resizing it with clumsy seams because Kashari was a scholar, not a tailor, and the stitching was uneven and the hem dragged, and the sleeves had to be rolled 4 times to clear Sira's wrists. Into the collar she had sewn the tag, 5 words in old-form Tessaran script, the predispersal glyphs that most translation databases could not process. The script Kashari had been teaching Sira to read 1 glyph set at a time in the evenings after the station lights dimmed. They had reached the 4th glyph set. The illness took Kashari's voice before they reached the 5th, then her hands, then the rest. After Kashari died, the freight station's labor bureau had reclassified Sira, orphan, unclaimed. Transit designation T-8830. The classification had taken 14 minutes. Sira knew because she had been sitting outside the bureau office counting the seconds, her ears tracking the conversation through the wall, the clerk's bored voice, the supervisor's rubber stamp, the brief discussion about which processing queue to assign her to. 14 minutes to reduce 12 years of being someone's child to a transit number and a labor category. They had assigned her to a processing queue for juvenile labor redistribution, the pipeline that fed children into mining operations and factory ships, and the quiet, efficient machinery of an economy that had learned to call exploitation by softer names. The processing was scheduled for the following morning. Sira had taken the coat and run. She had made it to Preston Station on a cargo shuttle whose pilot either had not noticed the teenage girl behind the water tanks or had noticed and said nothing. Preston was larger, busier, easier to disappear in, a commercial hub at the junction of 3 shipping lanes, its corridors thick with the noise and smell of 100 species doing business. But the Reclamation Compact's recovery agents had followed, because the Compact invested in persistence the way other organizations invested in technology, and now she was sitting in a service corridor in the dark, shaking, wearing a dead woman's coat with a message she could not read. In the assembly hall, Sira paused. She could feel the silence pressing against the chamber walls, the particular quality of silence that meant an audience had stopped performing attention and had begun actually paying it. "I need you to understand something about that corridor," she said. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was a maintenance access tunnel behind a food market on a mid-tier space station, and it smelled like pipe lubricant and someone's discarded lunch. The lighting was a single strip of emergency fluorescent that buzzed at a frequency I can still hear when I close my eyes. I was sitting on a metal floor in a coat that did not fit me, and I was trying to decide whether to keep running or to stop. She let that word hang, stop. She could feel 1,200 people understanding what it meant, not rest, not surrender, but the particular stopping that happened when a child ran out of reasons to believe that running led anywhere. Stopping for a TESS or an orphan classified as unclaimed meant the processing queue. It meant a facility. It meant that the songs Kashari had taught me, and the language she was teaching me, and the way she held her spine when she spoke, all of it would be filed under cultural data and stored in a server somewhere, and I would go to a place where no one would ever ask me to sing. She straightened. Her own spine held the way Kashari's had. I kept running. She found the workshop on the station's mid-deck, a cluttered bay where mechanical repairs happened for the freighters that docked at Preston's commercial ring. The door was open, which was why she chose it. Closed doors meant decisions. Open doors meant someone had already made one. The interior was bright with overhead panels and smelled like solder and machine oil and hot metal. Workbenches lined the walls, laden with disassembled components and diagnostic displays. A freighter engine sat on a stand in the center of the bay, its housing cracked open like a patient on an operating table. A human woman was standing at a workbench with her back to the door, working on something that involved a plasma torch and vocabulary that Sierra's translator rendered as creatively profane. Sierra stood in the doorway. She was breathing hard, her pulse visible in the hollow of her throat. Her feet were bleeding small cuts from the corridor grating, smeared pink on the deck plates behind her. She was clutching the coat around her like armor, her hands fisted in the fabric at her chest. The woman turned. She was maybe 40, with short-cropped dark hair silvered at the temples, wide shoulders, and hands that looked like they had been arguing with machinery for decades and winning most of the arguments. Her face was broad and wind-chapped, the complexion of someone who had spent time planetside before coming to a station where weather was something that happened to other people. She wore work coveralls with the station's mechanical services patch on the shoulder. She looked at Sierra. She looked at Sierra's bare feet. She looked at the blood on the deck plates. "You're dripping on my floor," she said. Sierra opened her mouth to say something, an apology, a plea, a lie about being lost, and what came out instead was a sound that was not a word in any language. It was the sound a person makes when they have been holding themselves together for 6 days and the structural integrity finally fails. The woman set the plasma torch down. She did not rush. She did not perform alarm or pity or the theatrical concern that adults sometimes displayed when confronted with a child in distress. The face that said "I am helping you" and expected gratitude before the help had started. She crossed the workshop in 4 unhurried strides, pulled a stool out from under the bench, and pointed at it. "Sit." Sierra sat. Her legs gave out as much as folded. The stool caught her and she gripped the seat's edges and her ears pressed flat and her breathing came in sharp, shallow bursts she could not control. The woman opened a cabinet, took out a first aid kit with the practiced efficiency of someone who patched things for a living, and crouched in front of the stool. She took one of Sierra's feet in her hand, her grip firm and careful, the grip of someone who understood that the thing she was holding was both tougher and more fragile than it looked, and began cleaning the cuts with an antiseptic pad. "Name," the woman said. "Not tell me your name. Not what's your name, sweetheart. Just the word, flat and practical, the way you'd ask for a part number." "Sierra." "I'm Marin Solis. I fix engines." She swabbed a cut and Sierra flinched. "Hold still, these aren't deep, you'll live." A pause. "Who's chasing you?" No one is." Marin looked up, brown eyes direct, with the particular flatness of someone who had heard enough lies to recognize them by weight. "Kid, you're barefoot, bleeding, wearing a coat that could fit 2 of you, and you came through my door like something was on your heels. I fix engines. I know what running sounds like. Who's chasing you?" Sierra's ears pointed, delicate, the cartilage still soft with adolescence, rotated forward from their flattened defensive position. Not all the way, just enough to hear the woman's heartbeat. It was steady, calm, 62 beats per minute, the rhythm of someone who was not afraid and was not performing calm to mask fear, the rhythm of someone whose body was doing exactly what it always did, because this was a person who had spent decades being steady and no longer needed to try. Recovery agents, Sierra said. Reclamation compact. I was classified as unclaimed after Kashari died. They want to process me for labor redistribution. Marin finished bandaging the first foot and moved to the second. Her hands were steady. Her face gave nothing away. Unclaimed, that's what they're calling it now. It is the legal terminology. It's a word that turns a kid into inventory. She looked at the coat, at the seams, at the way Sierra held the fabric against her chest. That's not yours. It was my mother's. She remade it from her own robe. She was not skilled with fabric. No, she wasn't. Marin's eyes tracked the uneven seams, the rolled sleeves, the dragging hem. Something moved across her face, not pity but recognition. The look of someone who understood what it meant to build something important with the wrong tools and build it anyway. There's a tag in the collar. Sierra's hand went to it, involuntary, the way a hand goes to a wound. I cannot read it. She was teaching me Tesseract script. We did not finish. Marin finished the second bandage. She stood, folded her arms, and leaned against the workbench. Are you hungry? Sierra's ears went fully forward before she could stop them. The involuntary response of a body that had not eaten properly in 6 days answering before the mind could compose a safer reply. Yes. Come on, the galley's through the back. I've got soup that's probably still good and bread that definitely isn't, but we'll manage. The woman's name was Marin Solis, Sierra told the assembly. Chief Mechanical Engineer, Preston Station Commercial Docks. She repaired freight engines for a living. She had been doing it for 15 years. Before that, she had served on a colonial survey ship, the crew that went ahead of settlers, mapping terrain and testing soil and building the infrastructure that other people would later live in. She had no children. She had no training in childcare, no experience with Tesseract biology, no legal standing to intervene in a reclamation compact recovery operation, and no particular reason to help a bleeding teenage girl who stumbled into her workshop, except that the girl was bleeding and the workshop had a first aid kit, and Marin Solis was constitutionally incapable of seeing something broken without attempting to fix it. She let that settle. She fed me soup from a thermos and bread that was 3 days old, and she sat across from me at the galley table and watched me eat with the expression of a woman who was doing arithmetic she did not enjoy, calculating the weight of what she was about to take on and measuring it against the weight of what would happen if she didn't. Marin did not say stay. She did not say I'll protect you. She did not say the things that stories told you humans said in moments like this, the grand declarations, the fierce promises, the words that turned a stranger into a guardian in a single sentence. She said, I've got a storage closet with a cot in it. The lock works. You can sleep there tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. The rest turned out to be considerable. Sierra slept for 14 hours. When she woke, the workshop was humming, Marin beneath a freighter engine, a diagnostic display casting blue light across the bay floor, tools scattered in what Sierra would later learn was Marin's filing system. The soup thermos was on the bench beside the storage closet door, refilled. Next to it, a pair of station-issue boots in a size that was close to right. Sierra put on the boots. They were slightly too large, the way the coat was too large, and she patted the toes with fabric torn from a cleaning rag because she had learned years ago that things that did not fit could be made to fit if you were willing to adapt. She ate the soup. She watched Marin work. She listened not just with her ears, which tracked every mechanical sound, but with the part of her that Kashari had trained to notice how people moved through space. Marin moved like her machines with purpose, without wasted motion. She talked to the engines while she worked, not affection, criticisms. You've got carbon scoring on your intake manifold, and your injector timing is off by 3 milliseconds, and if you don't stop throwing error codes at me, I'm going to rip out your entire fuel line and start over. The engine did not respond. Marin did not seem to expect it to. On the second morning, Sierra made herself useful. She organized the tool bench, sorted wrenches by size, aligned diagnostic probes in their rack, stacked replacement filters by compatible engine type. Marin came out from under a shuttle landing strut, saw the bench, and stood there for 5 seconds. Then she said, "You alphabetized my sealant compounds." By chemical composition, it seemed logical. "It is logical. Nobody has ever done it before." She paused. "You can hear the difference between a 2 mm torque variance and a 3 mm, can't you?" Sierra's ears rotated. "Yes, and your number 4 engine mount has a hairline fracture. I can hear it resonating when the compressor cycles." Marin walked to engine mount 4, ran a diagnostic probe along the housing and found the fracture, a crack so thin it would not have been visible for another week, when it would have failed under load and potentially killed the pilot. She looked at Sierra. She looked at the mount. She looked back. "You just saved a freighter crew, you know that." Sierra did not know what to do with the sentence. Compliments operated on a frequency she had not been calibrated to receive. She folded her hands the way Kashari had stood when speaking to officials, composed, upright, the dignity of the spine doing the work the voice could not. "The fracture was audible. I simply reported what I heard." "That's all any good mechanic does." Marin tossed her the diagnostic probe. "Come here. I'll show you how to map it." That was how the education began. Not with enrollment forms, but with a diagnostic probe and a cracked engine mount, and a woman who taught the way she fixed things. By doing, by showing, by standing beside you while you made the mistake, and then explaining without impatience where the tolerance had been exceeded. The recovery agents found the workshop 3 days after Sierra's arrival. 2 C-Thrani, commercial enforcement, moving through the middeck with flat amber eyes cataloging every face. Marin was under the freighter engine when they came through the bay doors. Sierra heard them first, their footsteps distinctive, the measured gait of predators who had never needed to rush. She was in the storage closet before Marin's head appeared, the lock engaged, her ears pressed to the bulkhead. "We hold a valid recovery warrant for transit designation T-8830. Our tracking indicates the subject entered this section within the past 72 hours. We require your cooperation." Marin slid out. She had grease on her face and a wrench in her hand that weighed more than most people's arguments. "I'm a mechanic. I cooperate with docking clamps and fuel lines. You want someone who cooperates with warrants, try the station administrator's office. Deck 12, Section 4. Take a number. The warrant authorizes search of commercial premises within station jurisdiction. This is my workshop, not a commercial premise. It's registered as a private mechanical services bay under my independent contractor license. Different jurisdiction. You want to search it, you need a separate filing from the station's civil magistrate." She paused, wiping her hands on a rag. "Her office is on Deck 9. She works half days. Today's her day off." They exchanged a glance, a brief exchange in their own language, a sound like metal filings sliding across glass. "We will return with the appropriate authorization." "I'm sure you will. Close the door on your way out. The bay pressure fluctuates, and it throws off my plasma torch calibration." They left. Sierra heard them go, heard the patience in their footsteps, the unhurried gait of creatures who had never needed to rush because nothing they pursued had ever escaped. She unlocked the closet and stood in the doorway. "They'll come back," Sierra said. "I know." Marin's voice came from under the engine, slightly muffled. "They always come back. The compact recovered a child from a refugee camp after 9 months. Marin slid out and looked at Sierra. "Kid, I've been arguing with station bureaucracy for 15 years. Those 2 have been arguing with me for 3 minutes. They're outmatched and they don't know it yet. Why are you doing this?" Marin wiped her hands. She looked at Sierra the way she looked at a machine she was about to take apart, not with sentiment, but with the steady attention of someone who needed to understand how something worked. "Because I read the tag," she said. Sierra's ears went rigid. "You can read Tessaran." "No. I ran it through a translation matrix last night. Took 4 tries. The script is old form predispersal. Most databases don't carry it." She folded the rag. "Do you want to know what it says?" Sierra's hands went to the collar. She had been carrying the words against her throat for 6 days, tracing the stitching with her fingers in the dark before sleep came. A name, a warning, a goodbye, instructions, coordinates, a prayer. "Yes. It says, please look after this one." The words landed in the space between them, and Sierra felt them arrive the way you feel a door open in a room you thought had no doors. Not a name, not a warning, not instructions. A request. 5 words addressed to no one and everyone. Kashari's last act of faith. Not in any specific person, not in the system, but in the slim, stubborn possibility that somewhere, someone would read 5 words stitched into a collar and decide they were enough. "She didn't write it for me," Sierra said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the mechanical precision her translator usually imposed. "She wrote it for whoever found me." "Yeah," Marin stood. She dusted off her hands. "And I found you so." So, 1 word. Not a promise, not a declaration. An acknowledgement that something had shifted and could not be shifted back. The Sithrani returned with authorization 3 days later. Marin met them at the door with a filing of her own, a jurisdictional challenge citing the distinction between commercial warrants and civil premises under the station residential privacy code. The magistrate took 6 days to rule. She ruled in Marin's favor, narrowly, on a technicality that the Sithrani's own filing had created by misclassifying the workshop's registration type. The Sithrani filed a countermotion. Marin filed a response. The countermotion cited the Reclamation Compact's bilateral authority on any station hosting compact-affiliated commerce. Marin's response cited the Station Education Continuity Act, because in the intervening 2 weeks she had enrolled Sierra in Preston's community education program and volunteered herself as program administrator, a position nobody else had wanted in 4 years. "Bureaucracy has one weakness," she told Sierra that evening, stirring soup in the galley with a wrench she had forgotten to put down. "It trusts people who volunteer for unpaid positions. Nobody suspects you of scheming when you take a job that pays nothing." Sierra attended classes: engineering fundamentals, station systems, cultural history. She sat in the back of a room with 11 other students and absorbed information with a speed that startled even her, because Kashari had taught her to learn, and now that there was structure beneath the learning it felt less like survival and more like breathing. She pulled top marks in everything. Her instructors noted her precision. They did not note the way she flinched when corridor lights flickered, or the way she sat with her back to the wall, or the way her ears tracked every sound in the corridor outside the classroom with the vigilance of someone who had not yet unlearned the habit of listening for pursuit. The second recovery team came 5 weeks in, different agents, same flat amber eyes, same measured patience. Marin met them with a new filing that cited Sierra's enrollment and educational continuity rights. They contested. She counterfiled. The magistrate ruled again, this time less narrowly, citing precedent that Marin had dug out of a station archives database at 2 in the morning while Sierra pretended to sleep, and listened to the woman's fingers on the data terminal, steady as her heartbeat, searching for the exact clause that would make the machine hold for another month. Between filings, the station helped. Not with speeches or rallies. Station people didn't work that way. They helped the way they always helped, quietly, practically, with the stubborn solidarity of people who lived inside a metal hull and understood that the hull only held if everyone held it together. The dock master, who argued with Marin every Thursday, made sure the Seathrani's docking permits required renewal every 72 hours instead of the standard 30 days. Processing times were regrettable. The station's communications officer discovered that outbound message traffic from the Seathrani's berth was being routed through an auxiliary relay that introduced a 40-hour delay. Technical issue. Being investigated. The galley that served the commercial docks raised its prices for non-resident visitors by 300%. Supply chain irregularities. Very sorry. None of it was coordinated. None of it was discussed in any room where Sierra could hear it, and she could hear most rooms. It was simply what happened when a station decided, without anyone saying a word, that the girl in the mechanic's workshop was their girl, and the people who had come for her could wait. The Chelsea trader who ran the parts supply shop stopped Sierra in the corridor one afternoon and pressed a small insulated container into her hands. "Tesseran nutritional supplement," she said. "My cousin's wife is Tesseran. She sends me the recipe. You're too thin." Sierra ate the supplement at her workbench that evening. It tasted like the compounds Kashari had made, not identical, but close enough that her eidetic memory fired. And for a moment she was back in the single room, and Kashari was stirring something, and the evening was happening the way evenings were supposed to happen. A week later, one of the Seathrani found Sierra alone. She was walking back from class through the mid-deck corridor when the enforcer stepped out of a recess doorway and fell into stride beside her. It did not block her path. It did not touch her. It simply matched her pace, its flat amber eyes fixed on the corridor ahead. "Transit designation T8830, it said, almost casual. Sierra kept walking, her ears locked forward. She measured its heartbeat, elevated slightly but controlled, not aggressive, calculating. "My name is Sierra." "Sierra, then. The mechanic cannot protect you forever. Her filings are inventive, but the compact has resources she does not." Sierra understood it. She understood it with the clear, clinical precision of someone who had spent her life calculating odds and finding them unfavorable and running anyway. "I understand that you are speaking to a minor without the presence of her custodial claimant or a station official," Sierra said. "Which, under the Station Juvenile Protection Code, Section 12, Subsection 3, constitutes unauthorized contact and can be cited as grounds for a restraining order that would extend the adjudication timeline by an additional 60 days. The Seathrani's stride faltered, barely perceptible, but Sierra's ears caught the shift in gait rhythm the way they caught everything. "Where did you learn that?" "I am enrolled in a community education program. I do my homework." She turned into the workshop corridor without looking back. Behind her, she heard the Seathrani stand in place for 11 seconds, she counted, and then walk away, its footsteps carrying the sound of a predator recalculating the distance to its prey and discovering it had grown. That evening, she told Marin. Marin listened, standing at the workbench with a fuel filter in one hand. "Section 12, Subsection 3, Marin said. "That's a real citation." "Yes, I found it in the station's legal database last week." "You've been reading station bylaws." "You read them." "I decided to do the same." Something crossed Marin's face. The look of a mechanic who had given someone tools and discovered they were building something that exceeded the original design specification. "Good," Marin said. "File the restraining order tomorrow. I'll casing it." The adjudication timeline extended by 60 days. The Seathrani did not approach Sierra again. "During those months, I learned things that had nothing to do with curriculum," Sierra told the assembly. "I learned that Marin hummed while she worked, a tuneless, rhythmic sound that matched whatever she was doing, faster for tight bolts, slower for delicate calibrations. I learned that she ate standing up, which she said was a surveyship habit she had never broken. I learned that she argued with the station's dockmaster every Thursday about berth allocations, and that the dockmaster argued back with equal vigor, and that they had been doing this for 11 years and neither had ever won because the argument itself was the point. She paused. I learned that she set the table for two without being asked, that she left the workshop lights on in the corridor outside the storage closet because she had noticed, without my telling her, that I slept better with light than without, that she modified the galley to stock Tesseran-compatible foods, which she ordered from a supply depot 3 transit hops away at her own expense, because she had looked up Tesseran dietary requirements on her data terminal the same night she translated the tag. Sierra looked at the chamber. She did not do these things with fanfare or sentiment. She did them the way she replaced a worn seal on an engine, because it needed doing and she was there, and leaving it undone would have meant the machine ran worse than it should. The third recovery team was the hardest. They came with a senior adjudicator, a tall Seathrani named Christian, with the rank insignia of a regional authority and the flat bearing of someone sent specifically because the local agents had failed. Christian arrived with 2 enforcement officers and a colonial authority liaison, and a file on Sierra thick enough to prop open a door. Marin met them at the workshop entrance. She was wearing her work coveralls, holding a mug of tea, and she looked like a woman who had been expecting company and had decided not to dress for it. Ms. Solis, I am Senior Adjudicator Christian. We have reviewed your filings. While creative, they do not constitute a valid basis for continued obstruction. The minor designated T-8830. Her name is Sierra, and she's in school. Christian paused. In school. Preston Station Community Education Program. Enrolled 8 weeks ago. Engineering Fundamentals, Station Systems, Cultural History. Top marks in all 3. Marin took a sip of tea. Under the Station Education Continuity Act, a minor enrolled in an active program cannot be removed from the jurisdiction during the academic term without a disruption waiver signed by the program administrator. And who is the program administrator? Me, I volunteered. Christian's amber eyes narrowed. This is a transparent delay tactic. It's an education program. The delay is a side benefit. She set the mug down. Adjudicator, you've got a file on Sierra, transit records, biological data, classification codes, everything about her that can be measured and filed. Do you know what's not in that file? Christian did not respond. The songs. Her mother taught her 11 songs in old form Tesseran, predispersal choral compositions. The linguistic analysis I commissioned confirms they have no other surviving record. Sierra is the only living carrier. Marin paused. Under the Cultural Heritage Preservation Act, Section 7, Subsection 12, a sole surviving carrier of endangered cultural material is entitled to protective status and cannot be transferred to any facility that lacks a certified cultural preservation program. Does the Reclamation Compact operate certified cultural preservation programs? Silence. No, Christian said, we do not. Then we have a problem. The only facility on this station with a cultural preservation certification is the Community Education Program, which I administer. Sierra, behind the storage closet's locked door, heard every word and heard the steady beat of Marin's pulse. 62 beats per minute, the same as always. The woman's heart did not race when she argued. It did not spike when she bluffed. Sierra had been listening to that heartbeat for months, and it had become the fixed point around which her own fear orbited, not disappearing, but no longer directionless. Marin's heartbeat was a coordinate. Christian's breathing changed, professional composure developing a fracture. These delays will not hold indefinitely, Miss Solis. Nothing holds indefinitely, that's basic engineering. The question isn't whether something holds forever, the question is whether it holds long enough. Marin's voice was steady, practical, stripped of drama. I've filed for permanent custody. The hearing is in 4 months. Until then, Sierra stays in school. She stays in my workshop, and she stays in the coat her mother made her. The weeks between Christian's visit and the custody hearing were the weeks when Sierra learned to stop listening for pursuit and start listening for something else. The ordinary sounds of a life being assembled around her, component by component, the way Marin assembled an engine. Marin found a Tesseran linguist retired, living on a station 6 transit hops away. She paid for remote tutoring sessions from her savings. She sat in the galley during every lesson, not listening. The language meant nothing to her but present, visible through the doorway, a fixed point. Sierra learned to read Tesseran, glyphs at 5, then 6, then 7. Each one a door that Kashari had been trying to open before the illness closed everything. Each one a room Sierra entered alone, but not quite alone, because Marin was in the next bay swearing at an injector, and the sound of her voice, steady, profane, utterly untroubled, was the closest thing Sierra had found to safety since Kashari's kitchen. There were other lessons, unscheduled and untitled, that happened in the spaces between the formal ones. Sierra learned that Marin kept a photograph taped to the inside of her tool cabinet, a group of people in surveyship uniforms standing in front of a half-built water reclamation plant on a world that was mostly red dust. Marin was in the back row, younger, her hair fully dark, grinning. "That's the Relhin colony crew," Marin said when she caught Sierra looking. 2 years building infrastructure on a world that smelled like sulfur and had weather that tried to kill us twice a week. Best job I ever had. "Why did you leave?" "The colony was finished. That's what survey crews do. We build the thing and then we leave so other people can live in it." She closed the cabinet. "Some people are settlers, some people are builders. I'm a builder." Sierra thought about this. She thought about Kashari, who had been a keeper, a woman who held things, preserved things, carried things forward. She thought about the coat, which Kashari had built with the wrong tools. She thought about the workshop, which Marin was building around her. Not a home exactly, but something adjacent to a home, something with walls and a lock and a heartbeat she could orient from. "What happens when you finish building something and there is nowhere to leave?" Sierra asked. The question hung between them, carrying more weight than its words. "Then I guess I stay," Marin said, and went back to work. One evening, 3 months in, Sierra was sitting at the galley table practicing glyphs at 9 when she realized she was humming. The melody was one of Kashari's, the 3rd song, the one about water moving through stone. She had not hummed it since before Kashari died. She had not known she still could. Marin appeared in the galley doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms folded, and listened. She did not speak. She did not smile. She simply stood there with the quiet, steady attention of a woman watching something she had repaired begin to run. When the melody ended, Marin said, "That's the 3rd one, right? You hum it differently than the others. Lower register." Sierra's ears went still. "You have been listening." "I listen to everything in my workshop, professional habit." She unfolded her arms. "You've got 11 of those." "Yes." "Good. The heritage preservation filing needs documentation. We'll record them this weekend. I've got an audio rig I use for engine diagnostics. It'll work for music, probably." She went back to the engine. Sierra sat at the table and listened to the sound of the wrench against metal and felt something shift in her chest. Not the sharp shift of a door opening, but the slow, deep shift of a foundation settling into place. The recordings took 3 weekends. Sierra sang each song into the diagnostic microphone that Marin had cleaned and recalibrated for the purpose. A device built to capture the frequencies of engine failure, repurposed to capture the frequencies of a culture that had nearly been erased. Marin sat at the next bench through all 11 recordings, running the audio through spectral analysis software designed for vibration diagnostics, because, she said, if she was going to submit these as evidence in a custody hearing, she wanted the waveforms documented at a standard that would make an acoustic engineer weep with professional envy. During the 7th song, The one about the Tesseran moons. Sira's voice broke. Not from emotion, from the particular strain of singing a melody that had been written for a full choir and was now carried by one voice. The harmonics were incomplete. The counterpoint was missing. The song had been composed to be sung by many and was being sung by one, and the absence was audible, a hole in the sound where the rest of the choir should have been. Marin stopped the recording. She looked at the waveform on her diagnostic display. She looked at Sira. "There's supposed to be more of it," she said, not a question. "Yes, it is a choral composition. I am singing all the parts, but some are written for voice registers that Tesseran adults carry and adolescents do not. Can you teach me the harmony line?" Sira's ears rotated so sharply they ached. "You cannot sing Tesseran harmonics. Your vocal range." "Can't hit the notes, I know. But if I hum the rhythm at my range, does it fill enough of the gap for the recording to show the structure? I'm not trying to be the choir. I'm trying to be evidence that the choir existed." Sira looked at her. This woman with grease on her hands and engine oil under her fingernails, who could not sing and did not pretend to, who was offering to hum a melody she did not understand in a language she could not speak so that a court filing would be one fraction more complete. "Yes," Sira said, "that would work." They re-recorded the seventh song. Marin hummed badly, off-key, in a rhythm that was approximately correct and a register that was entirely wrong, and on the waveform display the gap in the harmonic structure narrowed. Not closed, narrowed. Enough. "I want to tell you about the coat," Sira said to the assembly. Her hand moved to her collar again, the unconscious gesture of a woman touching a scar she had carried so long it had become part of her topography. "By the time the custody hearing arrived, I had been wearing it for 11 months. The seams Kashari had stitched were fraying. The hem was wearing through at the bottom. The sleeves, which I had rolled 4 times on the first day, now only needed to be rolled twice. I was growing, and the coat was aging, and between the two of us we were converging on something that fit. Marin offered to repair it. She was a mechanic. She could work with fabric the same way she worked with metal, she said, with the right adhesive and a steady hand. I told her no. The seams were Kashari's. The uneven stitching was Kashari's. The clumsy hem that dragged in the corridor was Kashari's. If the coat fell apart, it would fall apart as Kashari had made it. Marin understood this. She understood it the way she understood everything, not by analyzing it, but by recognizing it. She had seen enough machines held together with the wrong parts by someone who cared more than they knew, and she knew that sometimes the wrong parts were the right parts because they were the parts the builder had used, and replacing them would mean losing the builder. She did not touch the coat. She did not mention it again. But 2 days later I found a small tin of fabric sealant on my workbench with a note in Marin's blocky handwriting. "For the seams, if you want, no pressure." The sealant was industrial grade, the same compound she used to seal engine gaskets. She had looked up its compatibility with Tesseran textile fibers. She had tested it on a scrap of similar fabric first. The test strip was in the tin underneath the sealant with a second note. "Tested, does not discolor, does not weaken thread, safe for the stitching." I used it on 3 seams that were close to failing. The sealant held. It is still holding, 40 years later, on the strip of fabric in my pocket. That is what I mean when I say she looked after me, not with grand gestures, with fabric sealant and notes that said no pressure, with the understanding that the coat was not hers to fix, but that she could leave the tools where I could find them. The custody hearing took place on Meridian Station, the same hall where Sira now stood as ambassador, smaller than a magistrate's courtroom. The magistrate was a gray-haired human woman named Adler, who had the bearing of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything the frontier could produce. The compact sent a legal team. Marin brought herself, a folder of filings assembled on the workshop's data terminal in Sira. The hearing lasted 3 days. The compact's lawyers argued jurisdiction, precedent, the sanctity of commercial agreements. They cited recovery statistics and labor allocation efficiency, and the economic costs of allowing unclaimed minors to remain outside the redistribution system. Marin argued back. Not like a lawyer, she had no training, no credentials, no rhetorical strategy. She argued like a mechanic. She identified the broken component in each argument, isolated it, and explained in flat, precise language why it did not work. When the compact cited the Reclamation Agreement, Marin cited the Cultural Heritage Act. When they cited commercial law, she cited colonial family code. When they cited efficiency, she said, efficiency is a measure of output. It does not tell you whether the machine should be running in the first place. On the third day, Magistrate Adler asked Sira to speak. Sira stood. She was 16 by then, her skin the pale lavender of a Tesserine adolescent entering adulthood, her ears steady, her amber eyes clear. She wore the coat. It fit better now, she had grown into it, or it had settled around her, and the sleeves no longer needed to be rolled. I was asked to state my preference, Sira said. My preference is to remain with Marin Solis. She paused. She looked at the compact's legal team, 3 Seathrani in formal attire, their files stacked, their amber eyes impassive. On Tessara, there is a concept called Vainkashar. It translates imprecisely as the weight a person chooses to carry. It does not refer to obligation or duty. It refers to the weight that a person picks up because they have decided it belongs to them, not because someone assigned it, but because they saw it and recognized it, and understood that leaving it on the ground was not something they could do and still be the person they were. She looked at Marin, who was sitting at the respondent's table with her hands flat on the surface and her face composed, and her eyes on Sira with an expression that was not soft and was not hard but was simply present. The expression of a woman watching a machine she had repaired run for the first time and discovering that it worked. Marin Solis is not what the compact's file describes, an independent contractor exploiting jurisdictional ambiguity, Sira said. She is what the tag asked for. She is the person who read 5 words stitched into a collar and decided they meant something. She is the person who fed me soup and bandaged my feet and enrolled me in school and taught me to use a diagnostic probe and sat in a room while I learned to read the language my mother was teaching me when she died. She did not do this because the law required it. She did it because she read the tag, and the tag was enough. Sira looked at the magistrate. Marin Solis picked up the weight, Sira said. I am asking this court to let her keep carrying it. Magistrate Adler ruled in Marin's favor. The adoption was granted. The compact's claim was dismissed on cultural heritage grounds, with a secondary finding that the custodial bond was consistent with the minor's developmental and cultural needs. Sira stopped being transit designation T8830 and became Sira Solis. Later, she added Vakath, the name Kashari gave her. 2 mothers, 2 names, 1 coat. 11 months, Sira told the assembly. She held them off for 11 months, 3 recovery teams, 6 legal challenges, 1 jurisdictional argument so convoluted that the station magistrate asked Marin if she had ever considered law, and Marin told her that law was just mechanics with worse tools and lower torque specifications. A ripple through the chamber, not laughter, but its close relative. Marin died 9 years ago, quietly. In her workshop. She was working on a fuel injector. She never stopped working on fuel injectors, and her heart stopped, and they found her with a wrench in her hand and the injector fixed. A breath steady. I have held every rank the Tesserine diplomatic corps offers. I have negotiated treaties and trade agreements that affected billions of lives. I have stood before councils and assemblies more powerful than this one. She looked at the delegates. Nothing I have ever done required more courage than what Marin Solis did when she put a bandage on a teenager's foot and said, "We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Because she did not know the rest. She did not have a plan. She had a workshop and a first aid kit, and an independent contractor license, and the stubbornness of a woman who had spent 15 years arguing with machines that did not want to work and had never once walked away from one. She touched the collar of her formal robe. Underneath it, invisible to the audience but present against her skin, was a strip of fabric, old, worn soft by 4 decades, the stitching frayed, the thread thin, the glyphs nearly illegible. The human protection doctrine is not about law, Sira said. It is not about policy or the strategic advantages of a humanitarian framework, though those advantages are real, and I will let the economists argue them this afternoon. She paused. It is about the fact that a woman read 5 words stitched into a coat by a dying mother and decided they were instructions. She gathered her notes, the ones she had not needed, the props she had carried to the podium the way she still carried the coat, not because she required it, but because letting go of it would mean forgetting the weight, and the weight was the point. Please look after this one, Sira said. That is the doctrine. Everything else, the clauses, the amendments, the enforcement mechanisms, the budget allocations you will debate until your translators run out of patience, is just the wrench Marin would have used to make sure the machine kept working. She stepped away from the podium. The chamber was silent for 3 full seconds, the silence that is not emptiness but fullness, the silence of 1,200 people sitting with something they had not expected to feel. Then the Tesseran delegation stood, then the humans, then slowly, row by row, the rest. Sira Vakathsolis walked to her seat. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on the desk, the gesture she had never unlearned, the thing her body did when it needed to feel something solid, and she closed her eyes. In the pocket of her formal robe, folded small and worn soft from 4 decades of carrying, was the strip of fabric from the collar. 5 words in old-form Tesseran script, stitched by hands that were better with archives than with needles. She could read them now. She had learned to read them in a tutoring session on Preston Station, sitting at a workbench with a language primer and a cup of the bad tea Marin kept in the galley, Marin's voice in the next bay arguing with an engine about its injector timing. She had unfolded the tag and read the words for the first time and sat very still for a long time, and when Marin had come through the doorway and asked what was wrong, Sira had said nothing, because nothing was wrong. Everything was exactly what Kashari had intended. 5 words, 1 request, addressed to the universe and answered by a woman with grease on her hands and 62 beats per minute and a storage closet with a lock that worked. Please look after this one. She had, for 11 months that became years that became decades. She had looked after this one with wrenches and paperwork and bad tea and worse jokes, and the implacable, unglamorous, immovable stubbornness of a human being who had decided that a tag stitched into a collar by a dying woman was a contract, and contracts were to be honored, and the machine would work because she would make it work, the way she made every machine work, not with elegance, not with genius, but with patience and persistence, and hands that never stopped. The applause filled the chamber. Sira did not hear it. She was listening to something older, a frequency below the audible range, the ghost of a heartbeat she had memorized in a workshop 40 years ago. 62 beats per minute. Calm, steady. The fixed point she had oriented from ever since, through every negotiation and every crisis and every moment when the ground shifted, and she needed something solid to press her hands against. Outside the chamber windows, the stars turned. Somewhere on a station she would never visit or a ship she would never board, someone was running through a corridor in a coat that did not fit, carrying words they could not read, looking for an open door. Sira hoped the door led to a workshop. She hoped there was a woman inside who would look at the blood on the floor and say something ordinary and unforgettable, something small and practical and solid enough to build a life on. She straightened her spine the way Kashari had taught her, and she began the work of making sure the machine kept running.